I thought it would be nice if Felicia joined us tonight. My husband Daniel said it so casually, like he was suggesting we order dessert. We were sitting at Rossini's, the upscale Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated every anniversary for the past 8 years. The candlelight flickered between us, casting shadows across his face. I watched him signal the waiter, completely at ease, as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb on our 10th anniversary dinner. Felicia, his ex-girlfriend from college. The woman he'd dated for 4 years before we met. The woman whose photos he'd kept hidden in his desk drawer until I accidentally found them 2 months ago. She's going through a difficult time, Daniel continued, not meeting my eyes. Her divorce just finalized. I ran into her at the coffee shop last week and she seemed so lost. I told her we'd be here tonight. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the moment stretch. Daniel finally looked up, perhaps expecting tears or anger. Instead, I smiled. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said softly. His relief was visible, shoulders relaxing as he reached for my hand across the table. What Daniel didn't know was that I'd been expecting this moment for weeks. My name is Natasha Bennett, and until 2 months ago, I believed I had a solid marriage. I'm 42 years old, a certified public accountant with my own small firm. I'd spent the last decade building a life with Daniel, supporting his career as a real estate developer while managing our finances and investments. We had no children, a decision we'd made together early on. Daniel always said kids would complicate his business ambitions. I'd agreed, though sometimes I wondered if I'd given up too much for his dreams. Our life looked perfect from the outside. We lived in a renovated colonial in the historic district, drove nice cars, and vacationed in Europe twice a year. Friends envied our relationship. Daniel was charming and successful, always knowing the right thing to say at parties. But perfection is often just a carefully maintained illusion. 2 months ago, I'd been looking for stamps in Daniel's home office when I found the drawer. It wasn't locked, just stuck. Inside were photos, letters, and a small velvet box. The photos showed Daniel and Felicia, young and happy, wrapped around each other at various locations. The letters were recent, dated within the last 6 months, and the box contained a silver bracelet I'd never seen him give to anyone. I didn't confront Daniel immediately. Instead, I did what I do best. I investigated. Years of tracking financial irregularities for clients had taught me patience and attention to detail. I started reviewing our bank statements more carefully, looking beyond the obvious transactions. That's when I noticed the pattern. Small cash withdrawals, always $200, every Friday for the past 4 months. Daniel had claimed he was paying a contractor in cash for some property renovations. But when I drove past the property, it sat untouched, no signs of recent work. Next, I checked his phone records online. We shared a family plan, so I had access. The same number appeared repeatedly, usually late at night or during his lunch breaks. I traced it to Felicia Morrison. She'd moved back to town 6 months ago, right around the time the cash withdrawals started. I hired a private investigator named Wesley Park, recommended by a divorce attorney friend. Wesley was thorough and discreet. Within 2 weeks, he documented multiple meetings between Daniel and Felicia. Coffee shops, lunch dates, and twice at her apartment. The photos showed them laughing, touching, clearly intimate beyond casual friendship. But I needed more than photos of coffee dates. I needed to understand Daniel's intentions and protect myself financially. Our assets were complicated. Daniel's real estate company was technically separate from my accounting firm, but we'd invested jointly in several properties. We had a prenuptial agreement, something Daniel had insisted on when we married. At the time, I'd signed it without much thought, trusting him completely. Now I pulled out that document and read it carefully. The prenup heavily favored Daniel. In case of divorce, I'd receive only 20% of jointly acquired assets and nothing from his business. However, there was a clause I'd forgotten about. If either party could prove infidelity with documented evidence, the prenup became void, and standard state divorce laws would apply. That clause changed everything. I contacted my attorney friend, Brenda Walsh, who specialized in family law. She reviewed the prenup and smiled. If you can prove infidelity, you're entitled to 50% of everything acquired during the marriage. That includes his business growth, property investments, and retirement accounts. Over the next month, I quietly prepared. I documented every asset, every account, every investment. I also made some strategic moves of my own. I transferred money from our joint savings into a separate account at a different bank, careful to take only my documented contributions. I updated passwords on my business accounts. I gathered evidence of my financial contributions to Daniel's business over the years, including a significant loan from my parents that had never been repaid. Most importantly, I kept acting normal. I smiled at breakfast, asked about his day, and planned our anniversary dinner. Daniel had no idea I was watching his every move, documenting his lies, building my case. When Wesley called 3 weeks before our anniversary, his voice carried a hint of excitement. "I've got something significant. Daniel met Felicia at her apartment yesterday afternoon. He was there for 3 hours. I have time-stamped photos of him entering and leaving, and the building security footage shows he visited her apartment specifically." I thanked Wesley and added the report to my growing file. Then Daniel came home that evening and suggested we have a special anniversary dinner at Rossini's. "Let's make it memorable," he'd said, kissing my forehead. I'd agreed enthusiastically, already knowing exactly how memorable it would become. Morning of our anniversary, Daniel was unusually attentive. He brought me coffee in bed, something he rarely did anymore. 10 years, he said, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "Hard to believe how fast it's gone." I studied his face, looking for signs of guilt or deception. He seemed genuinely reflective, almost sad. For a moment, I wondered if I'd misread everything. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Wesley. "Subject met F. Morrison this morning at Lakeside Park. Photos attached." Deep conversation appeared emotional. I glanced at the photos discreetly. Daniel and Felicia sat close on a park bench, her hand on his arm, both looking serious. The timestamp showed 30 minutes ago, right when Daniel had claimed to be at the gym. "You seem distracted," Daniel said, noticing my expression. "Just work stress," I replied smoothly. "One of my clients is going through a complicated audit." He nodded absently, already moving on to check his own phone. That afternoon, I went to my office and made copies of all my evidence. One set went to Brenda, another to my safety deposit box, and a third stayed in my car. I dressed carefully for dinner that evening. Not too fancy, but elegant. A navy dress Daniel had always liked, paired with the diamond earrings he'd given me for our 5th anniversary. I wanted to look confident and composed for what was coming. During the drive to Rossini's, Daniel seemed nervous. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, and he kept clearing his throat. "I need to tell you something," he started, then paused. My heart rate increased. Was he actually going to confess? "Tonight might be a little different than usual," he continued. "I've invited someone to join us, someone who needs support right now." I waited, letting him explain about Felicia, watching him construct his justification. He presented it as charity, compassion for an old friend going through hard times. No mention of their months of secret meetings or his frequent visits to her apartment. When he finished, I gave him my prepared response, accepting his invitation with understanding and grace. The relief on his face was almost comical. He actually thought I was buying this performance. We arrived at Rossini's 15 minutes early. Our usual table by the window was ready, overlooking the city lights. Felicia arrived exactly on time, wearing a black cocktail dress that was slightly too formal for the occasion. She was attractive, I'd give her that. Tall, blonde, with the kind of effortless elegance that comes from money and good genes. She was 38, 4 years younger than me. "Natasha, this is Felicia," Daniel said, standing to greet her with a hug that lasted a beat too long. "Felicia, my wife Natasha." We shook hands. Her grip was firm, her smile pleasant but guarded. Up close, I could see the strain around her eyes. Whatever was happening between her and Daniel, it wasn't bringing her peace. "Thank you for letting me crash your anniversary," Felicia said, settling into the chair Daniel pulled out for her. "Daniel mentioned you wouldn't mind, but I still feel like I'm intruding." "Not at all," I replied warmly. "Any friend of Daniel's is welcome." The waiter appeared with menus and took our drink orders. Felicia requested a martini, extra dry. Daniel ordered his usual scotch. I stuck with wine, knowing I needed to stay sharp. As we waited for drinks, an awkward silence fell over the table. Daniel jumped in quickly, asking Felicia about her recent divorce. Felicia talked about her failed marriage with surprising openness. Her ex-husband had cheated with a coworker. The betrayal had blindsided her after 12 years together. "I never saw it coming," she said, her voice catching slightly. I thought we were happy. Turns out he'd been living a double life for almost 2 years. I made sympathetic noises while internally nodding the irony. She was the other woman in my marriage, yet she'd been victimized in her own. People are endlessly complicated. That must have been devastating, I said, discovering that someone you trusted was lying to you for so long. My eyes flickered to Daniel, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. How did you finally find out? Felicia took a long sip of her martini before answering. Credit card statements. He'd been careless about covering his tracks. Once I started looking, the evidence was everywhere. It's amazing what people think they can hide, I agreed, especially in this digital age. Everything leaves a trail. Daniel cleared his throat loudly. Maybe we should talk about something more cheerful. It is supposed to be a celebration. Felicia looked embarrassed. You're right, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be dumping my problems on your anniversary. Actually, I think it's important to talk about these things, I said, ignoring Daniel's warning glance. Betrayal, trust, honesty in relationships, these are fundamental issues. I turned to Felicia with genuine curiosity. When you found out about the affair, did you confront him immediately, or did you gather evidence first? Felicia leaned forward, warming to the topic. I gathered evidence. My lawyer told me documentation was crucial for the divorce settlement. My ex had tried to hide assets, transfer money to accounts I didn't know about. Smart, I nodded. Emotional reactions rarely serve us well in these situations. Better to be strategic to understand the full scope before acting. Daniel was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Can we order dinner? I'm starving. We paused to place our orders. Filet mignon for Daniel, salmon for Felicia, and pasta primavera for me. When the waiter left, I steered the conversation back. So your ex was hiding money? That's financial fraud within a marriage. Did your lawyer use that against him? Absolutely, Felicia said. The judge was not pleased. It actually worked in my favor during settlement. I ended up with much more than I would have otherwise. Daniel was practically squirming now. Felicia, I'm sure Natasha doesn't want to spend the evening discussing divorce settlements. Actually, I find it fascinating, I said. As an accountant, I see financial deception all the time. It's one of the ugliest things people do to each other. I paused for effect. Especially when it happens within a marriage where there should be complete trust and transparency. Felicia nodded emphatically. Exactly. The money was bad enough, but the lying was worse. Looking back, I can see all the signs I missed. The phone calls he'd taken another room, the sudden need for privacy with his computer, the unexplained absences. Those are definitely red flags, I agreed, my eyes fixed on Daniel. Did he ever explain why he did it? What makes someone destroy a perfectly good marriage? Felicia's expression hardened. He said he felt trapped, that our marriage had become routine and boring. The other woman made him feel young and excited again. She laughed bitterly. Classic midlife crisis garbage. How incredibly selfish, I said. Instead of communicating his feelings or working on the marriage, he just started lying and sneaking around. Daniel stood abruptly. I need to use the restroom. Order wine for the table if the waiter comes back. After Daniel left, Felicia and I sat in silence for a moment. She studied me with new interest, perhaps sensing an undercurrent she hadn't noticed before. You're handling this very graciously, she said carefully. What do you mean? I asked innocently. Me crashing your anniversary dinner, most wives would be furious. I smiled. Daniel and I have always been secure in our relationship. I'm not threatened by his friendships. Even as I said it. I wondered if she caught the slight emphasis on friendships. Felicia looked away, a flush creeping up her neck. Guilt, perhaps, or discomfort at the lie we were all maintaining. Daniel speaks very highly of you, she said. He says you're brilliant with finances, that you've helped him make smart investment decisions over the years. That's kind of him, I replied. Though I'd say we've built his success together. I've invested considerable time and money into his business ventures. The waiter arrived with our entrees. As he set down the plates, I noticed Felicia's phone light up on the table. A text preview showed. How's it going? Is she suspicious? She grabbed the phone quickly, but not before I'd read it. Daniel returned just as we were starting our meals. He seemed more composed, having given himself a pep talk in the bathroom. The conversation shifted to safer topics like upcoming local events and restaurant recommendations. I played along, laughing at Daniel's jokes and appearing relaxed. But my mind was racing, planning my next moves. Throughout dinner, I observed their subtle interactions. The way Daniel's hand brushed Felicia's arm when reaching for the bread basket. How Felicia laughed just a bit too enthusiastically at his stories. The loaded glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching. They were being careful but not careful enough. After our plates were cleared, Daniel excused himself to take a phone call. "Work emergency," he said apologetically. "I'll just be a minute." When he was out of earshot, Felicia turned to me. "Natasha, I want to apologize." My pulse quickened. "For what?" "For intruding on your anniversary. I shouldn't have come." Daniel insisted, but I should have declined. I set down my wine glass carefully. "Why did Daniel insist?" Felicia hesitated, choosing her words. "He's been a good friend during my divorce, very supportive. I think he feels responsible for my well-being somehow." "That's very noble of him," I said neutrally. "Has he been helping you for long?" "A few months," Felicia admitted. "We reconnected at a coffee shop back in March. I was a mess and he took the time to listen." March, exactly when the cash withdrawals had started. "And you've been meeting regularly since then?" I asked, keeping my tone casual and friendly. "Yes, usually for coffee or lunch. He's been wonderful, really. A true friend when I needed one." She paused. "I hope you don't mind." "Why would I mind?" I asked, though we both knew the answer. Before Felicia could respond, Daniel returned. "Sorry about that. Crisis averted." He signaled the waiter. "Let's get dessert. They have an amazing tiramisu here." As we waited for dessert, I excused myself to the ladies' room. Once inside, I pulled out my phone and texted Wesley. "Need confirmation on timeline. How many documented meetings total?" His response came within seconds. 18 meetings since March 15th. "Full report ready when you need it." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Tonight wasn't about confrontation. Tonight was about gathering the final pieces of evidence I needed. I refreshed my lipstick and returned to the table. Dessert arrived, a shared tiramisu with 3 spoons. I watched Daniel and Felicia interact over the shared plate, their spoons occasionally touching, smiles passing between them. They'd grown comfortable with each other, that was clear. The ease of their connection spoke to months of building intimacy. "This has been lovely," I said when we'd finished. "Felicia, I'm so glad you could join us." I meant it, though not for the reasons they thought. "Actually, I have an announcement." Daniel looked surprised. "An announcement?" "Yes. I've been working on something special for our anniversary." I pulled out my phone and opened a folder. "I created a photo montage of our 10 years together. I thought we could watch it now." Daniel's expression showed confusion mixed with panic. Felicia looked uncomfortable, clearly feeling like she should leave. "It'll just take a few minutes," I assured them, setting my phone on the table where we could all see the screen. The photos began playing. Our wedding day, vacations, holiday celebrations. Each image was labeled with a date. The dates were crucial. I'd carefully selected photos that aligned with Daniel's lies. A picture of us at a beach resort appeared, labeled March 22nd, anniversary of our first date. I watched Daniel's face as he recognized the significance. March 22nd was a Friday, the same day he'd claimed to be meeting contractors, but had actually been photographed having lunch with Felicia at a restaurant across town. Next came a photo from April, then May. Each one coincided with a date Wesley had documented one of Daniel's secret meetings with Felicia. I wasn't confronting them directly, just laying out a timeline they'd both recognize. The message was subtle but clear. I knew. Felicia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, perhaps putting the pieces together. Daniel had gone pale, the implications sinking in. "These are wonderful memories," I said sweetly as the montage ended. 10 years of building a life together, trust, partnership, shared investments. I emphasized the last word slightly. "Worth protecting, don't you think?" The table fell silent. Finally, Daniel found his voice. "Yes, absolutely worth protecting." Felicia was staring at her empty martini glass like she wished she could disappear into it. I'd made my point without saying anything directly accusatory. They now knew I wasn't the naive, trusting wife they'd assumed I was. Waiter brought the check and Daniel reached for it automatically. "Actually," I said, "I'd like to pay tonight, my treat for our anniversary." I pulled out my credit card, the one linked to my separate business account that Daniel knew nothing about. Daniel looked confused but didn't argue. As I signed the receipt, I said casually, "Felicia, it was lovely meeting you. Daniel's told me so much about your friendship." The emphasis on friendship was deliberate. "I hope your situation improves soon." Felicia mumbled her thanks and stood quickly. "I should get going. Thank you both for dinner." After she left, Daniel and I sat in awkward silence. He seemed to be waiting for me to say something, to acknowledge the elephant in the room, but I simply gathered my purse and stood. "Ready to go home?" On the drive back, Daniel tried to start several conversations, but I kept my responses minimal. I wasn't ignoring him, just giving him space to stew in his own anxiety. At home, I headed straight to our bedroom. "I'm exhausted," I said. "That was a long evening." Daniel followed me upstairs, clearly agitated. "Natasha, about tonight. It was interesting," I interrupted. "Meeting Felicia, hearing about her divorce, really made me think about trust in relationships." Daniel stood in the doorway, uncertain how to proceed. "I know having her there was unusual." "Unusual," I repeated, turning to face him. "Daniel, you invited your ex-girlfriend to our anniversary dinner without telling me in advance. I'd say that goes beyond unusual." He deflated slightly, his carefully constructed excuse crumbling. "I should have asked you first. I'm sorry." "You should have done a lot of things differently," I said quietly. I wasn't ready to reveal everything yet, but I wanted him to know I wasn't blind. "But I'm tired, and I don't want to have this conversation tonight." I went to bed, leaving Daniel standing there, confused and worried. Over the next few days, I watched him carefully. He became more attentive, bringing home flowers and suggesting date nights. Guilt manifesting as overcompensation. Meanwhile, I finalized my preparations. Brenda had filed the divorce papers but held them from being served, waiting for my signal. Wesley completed his final report with overwhelming documentation of Daniel's affair. I transferred the last of my personal assets into secure accounts. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after our anniversary dinner, I was ready. Daniel had left early for a supposed business meeting. Wesley confirmed he was actually at Felicia's apartment. I called Brenda. "File everything today." "You're sure?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Completely sure." Within hours, the papers were filed. A process server would deliver them to Daniel at his office that afternoon, ensuring maximum impact. I spent the morning at my own office, working calmly through my client list. My business was entirely separate from Daniel's, built with my own capital and effort. He had no claim to it. At 2:00, my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times over the next hour, each voicemail more frantic than the last. Finally, he texted, "We need to talk, I'm coming home now." I was waiting in the living room when he arrived, looking disheveled and panicked. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving the divorce papers. "You had me served at work, in front of my colleagues." "Yes," I said calmly. "I thought a public setting was appropriate, given how you chose to celebrate our anniversary." Daniel threw the papers on the coffee table. "This is insane. We can work this out." "Work what out exactly? Your months-long affair with Felicia, the money you've been siphoning from our accounts, the lies." His face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out a folder from beside my chair, the same folder I'd been building for 2 months. 18 documented meetings since March, photos of you entering and leaving her apartment, bank statements showing cash withdrawals that coincide with your dates, phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts. I spread the evidence across the coffee table methodically. Daniel sank into a chair, staring at the documentation. "It's not what you think." "Really? Then explain it to me." He struggled to find words. "Felicia and I were just friends. She was going through a hard time and I was helping her. By visiting her apartment for hours at a time, by withdrawing cash every week, by lying to me about where you were." I kept my voice level, refusing to show the hurt underneath. "Daniel, I have proof of infidelity. The prenup you insisted on has a clause about that, remember?" His eyes widened with realization. "The prenup becomes void if infidelity is proven." "Exactly. Which means I'm entitled to 50% of everything we've built together, including the growth of your real estate business that I helped fund." Daniel's shock transformed into anger. "You've been planning this, that anniversary dinner, inviting Felicia, you set us up." "I didn't invite Felicia," I corrected. "You did that all by yourself. I simply paid attention and documented the truth." He stood abruptly, packing the room. "I can't believe you're doing this. 10 years together and you throw it away over nothing." "Nothing," I repeated. "You had an affair, lied repeatedly, and stole from our joint accounts. You invited your mistress to our anniversary dinner and expected me to smile through it. That's not nothing." "Felicia isn't my mistress," he insisted weakly. I pulled out one more photo from the folder. Wesley's investigator had captured it 3 days ago. Daniel and Felicia kissing outside her apartment building, his hands in her hair, both of them completely absorbed in each other. Daniel stared at the photo, his defenses finally crumbling. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to protect myself," I replied. "Long enough to make sure you couldn't do to me what Felicia's ex did to her. Ironic, isn't it? She warned me herself about hiding assets and gathering evidence." Understanding dawned on his face. "That conversation at dinner, you were sending us a message." "I was being honest," I said. "Something you haven't been in months." Daniel sat down heavily, the fight draining out of him. "What happens now? Now we proceed with the divorce. My attorney has filed all necessary paperwork. Given the evidence of your affair, the prenup is void. We'll divide assets according to state law." "I'll fight this," he said, but without conviction. "You're welcome to try, but you should know that I've documented everything. Every asset, every investment, every penny I contributed to your business, including the $50,000 loan from my parents that you never repaid." His shoulders slumped. The full scope of his situation was becoming clear. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I said quietly. "Not just by having an affair, but by disrespecting me, by thinking I was too trusting or too stupid to notice, by inviting her to our anniversary dinner as some kind of twisted power play." Daniel looked up sharply. "That wasn't what I was doing." "Then what was it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looked like you wanted to have us both there, to see if you could get away with it, to feel powerful." Didn't answer which was answer enough. After a long silence, Daniel asked, "Are you going to tell everyone, make this public?" "I'm going to be honest when people ask why we're divorcing," I replied. "But I'm not interested in humiliating you. This isn't about revenge, Daniel. It's about protecting myself and getting what I'm legally entitled to." "Felicia and it's not serious," he said suddenly. "It was just, I don't know, an escape from reality. She understood what I was going through." "What you were going through?" I couldn't help the bitter laugh. "You were going through having a comfortable life with a wife who supported your dreams and helped build your success. How terrible for you." Daniel flinched. "You're right, I screwed up, massively. Is there any chance we could work this out? Go to counseling?" "No," I said firmly. "You didn't just make one mistake. You made hundreds of choices over months. Every lie, every secret meeting. Every time you touched her while wearing your wedding ring. Those were choices, Daniel, and they have consequences." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. You deserved better." "Yes," I agreed. "I did." The divorce process took 4 months. Daniel's attorney tried to challenge the prenup's validity and argue for a different interpretation of the infidelity clause. But the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, we settled for close to what Brenda had initially projected. I received 50% of all marital assets, including half the equity in Daniel's business. The house was sold, and we split the proceeds. I kept my accounting firm entirely, as it had always been separate. Daniel's relationship with Felicia didn't survive the divorce. According to mutual friends, she ended things when she realized he had much less money than she'd thought. Apparently, being the other woman loses its appeal when there's no financial security attached. I used my settlement to expand my accounting practice, eventually opening a second office across town. I specialized in helping women understand their finances during major life transitions, particularly divorce. My experience gave me credibility and empathy that clients valued. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Felicia at a coffee shop. She looked uncomfortable seeing me but didn't avoid the encounter. "Natasha," she said awkwardly, "how are you?" "I'm well," I replied honestly. "You?" "Getting by. I heard about your business expansion. Congratulations." We stood there for a moment, 2 women connected by one man's poor choices. "I owe you an apology," Felicia said finally. "What Daniel and I did was wrong. I knew he was married and I let it happen anyway." "Why did you?" I asked, genuinely curious. She considered the question carefully. "I was lonely and broken from my divorce. Daniel made me feel desirable again. I told myself you probably didn't care, that your marriage was already failing. Classic justifications." "Our marriage was fine until you came along," I said, though I wondered if that was entirely true. Maybe there had been cracks I hadn't wanted to see. "Probably not," Felicia replied with surprising insight. "Happy people don't have affairs. There was clearly something missing for Daniel, even if you didn't see it." I thought about that later as I drove home to my new apartment, smaller than the house but entirely mine. She wasn't wrong. Maybe I had missed signs of Daniel's unhappiness, but that didn't excuse his choices or make his betrayal acceptable. The story of my 10th anniversary dinner became something I occasionally shared with clients going through similar situations. Not as a tale of revenge, but as an example of the importance of awareness and preparation. That night at Rossini's, I could have made a scene. I could have confronted them publicly, thrown wine, walked out dramatically. Instead, I'd smiled and gathered the final evidence I needed. Some people might call that cold or calculating. I called it self-preservation. And looking back, I never regretted it.